Remarkable acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are gathered today. This is their land, never ceded, always sacred. And we pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the nation. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the remarkable contribution they make to Australian life. And we would also like to acknowledge the advocates who have played a role in advancing the rights of people with disability, leading to address the inequalities faced by people with disability. They have paved the way for us. We carry a privilege and a responsibility because of that history. We are better together. Did you know that more than 1 billion people globally are living with some form of disability? And that 80% of this population live in low and middle income countries, and that only 1 in 10 of those have access to the assistive technology they need? In the following episode, we speak with Bernard Chiira, founder of Africa's first Assistive Technology Accelerator, based in Nairobi, Kenya, to talk about his life growing up with scoliosis and his mission to raise the business profile of investing in assistive tech startups in Africa. We discuss the accessibility, equity and affordability of assistive technology in Africa and how regulation must meet the needs of innovation in order to get the technology into the hands of those who need it most. Before we jump in, we'd like to ask our guests, because this will be a video podcast, to do a visual description of themselves. So if you wouldn't mind, could you do a visual description of who you are as a person and the setting that you're in?
Yeah, I will try. So here goes. So I am an African man, black hair, excuse me, brown skin, wearing a pink shirt, and I'm joining you all the way from Nairobi.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Now, you are a pretty impressive human, and pretty impressive is a massive understatement. You've achieved quite a lot in your lifetime. But I would love to just start off with if you could just kind of give a bit of an introduction to who you are, and how you know where you grew up in the world, and how that led you to the current sort of position you are in now with your career.
Okay, let's try. So I am born and raised in Kenya. I wasn't born in the big city. Actually, I was born in the village in the 80s. I'm born 85. And I remember the story goes because I was too small. I can't remember that when I was 2 weeks old, I was shipped back to the hospital, and that's because I couldn't stop crying and my parents were trying to figure out why. So at the age of 2 weeks I was diagnosed with brittle bone disease, and that has been a disability that I've lived with, and my childhood was one of in and out of hospital. So at some point when we were like 3 4 years old, we moved to the city mainly to try and access better healthcare. So my entire family moved. I come from a relatively big family, seven in total. Second last, and I do have other siblings in my family who also had a physical disability. So I would say that disability and inclusion and diversity has been a feature in my family because some of us had disability and some didn't. And we basically learned how to thrive together and support each other. So that's kind of my beginning. Obviously, when we joined a big city, things were a bit much easier access to healthcare specifically. So my condition was treated surgically, and that is what reduced the fractures that used to have to occur. But then before I approached teenage, I developed scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine, and that also had to be managed a little bit with the available treatment at the time. So um, growing up, going to school was not easy for me. As you can imagine, inclusive or accessible education, even today, is not where we're supposed to be in many countries. So back then, getting into schools was very difficult. And I remember I went to boarding school in kindergarten, and I usually tell people this. and they can't understand how is that even possible. And the reason is the regular schools could not admit me. They didn't think they were equipped, or they didn't think I would thrive in their school. So I had to go to what they would call special schools then. So it was a school called Joytown, an hour away from my home place. It was a boarding school, and it combined two things: so rehabilitation and education. But then you could spend your entire childhood there, because they had all the way from kindergarten to primary school, and that's actually to high school. And that's pretty much what happened. I spent my good portion of my childhood in boarding school, and I think what that did to me is made me very independent, because you learn how to take care of yourself, and you learn that the world is much more complex than your issue. um, yeah, so that was my primary school. Then in high school, I remember I told my parents, look, I don't want to go to a boarding school anymore, and I don't want to go to a special school anymore. I want to go to a regular school, because I think I want to interact with kids who have no disabilities, just so they can see that there's nothing wrong with having a disability, and I could actually perform as good as them, if not better. And that's what we did. We embarked on the journey again to look for a school. It was very hard, but eventually we found a school called Aquinas High School. And the most beautiful thing about that school is, even though it was not accessible from a built environment perspective, they had an accessible, inclusive attitude, like everyone. So from the head teachers, excuse me, to the students, and they told us that, you look, we've had kids here who use wheelchairs before, and I mean, you guys will be fine, because I joined the school with my brother at that time, and we joined together, and we joined a regular school, and that was an amazing experience for me, because I got to experience what I wanted, and also to challenge, the mindset of kids who had never met other kids with disabilities. And I performed quite well, both academically and socially. Yeah, and then of course after that it was campus time, and I ended up, in one of the leading universities here in Kenya, called Strathmore University, and I had a blast there as well. I was a student leader. I sang in the choir, went on a couple of concert tours. We did record an album. Actually, there's a song on YouTube. If you search,
Oh my gosh.
there is a song.
Yes.
So campus for me was a place where I really wanted to reconnect with, um, my musical side, my social side, because I felt like in high school I sacrificed a lot for academics just so I could get to university. Yeah, so that was it. Campus. I eventually ended up doing a double degree. So I studied business and computer science at Strathmore University, and I graduated in 2011. Now, that around that time, I joined a new department in the university. So Strathmore was setting up a research and innovation center. It was the first time a university was doing this in Kenya, and I applied to join the space. And it was a very competitive master's degree. So the idea was, you work during the day, and you study in the evening, and that's how I actually began my career in technology. So my master's was in mobile telecommunication and innovation, and I joined iLab Africa, that's the name of the center, as a research scholar, and then began there, and ended up, 4.5 years ago, leading the business incubator for 4.5 years before I left to join the Global Disability Innovation Hub back in 2019 to launch Innovate Now in Kenya, which is Africa's first assistive tech accelerator. And we've been running it now for 3.5 years, and kind of bringing the mindset of technology and innovation in the disability world, which was something quite new um, on this side of the world. And I'm going to stop there before I give you my entire.
I love it. I mean, the more I can learn, the better. But I suppose I'd like to jump back to when you say you took this you made this move as a family from having to move to the city to help with sort of your journey with uh, navigating the support you needed with your disability. What was the place that you grew up in? If you hadn't moved to the city, were you living in quite a rural part of Africa?
Yeah, so I grew up in the central parts of Kenya. It's called Nyeri. It's a very mountainous area. So that's actually the second highest mountain in Africa. Mount Kenya is in Nyeri. So it's kind of a famous place. Um, yeah, so it was a rural village, totally, of course, no accessibility whatsoever, very underdeveloped, healthcare system, education system. It was your typical rural life. Our house was a very simple wooden house. Yeah, and the mainstay of our family was farming. My mama was a farmer, and my dad used to work in the bank, and he had a banking career. So most of the time he was actually not in the village. He was in the city working. So I think it was a life where having a disability and living in the village was not easy, especially for my mom, because she had kids, multiple kids with disabilities. So from a societal perspective, of course, the stigma was quite a thing, in the African setting. Culturally, things like disability are not, well received. So people kind of resolve to, yeah, why does she have kids with disabilities? What did she do? So, of course, these are some of the things that, do affect a lot of people growing in low income settings, or underdeveloped settings. But I think I would say the most powerful thing is basically the power of love and family, because most families are split by disability in Africa. Like parents split up, and I think my parents are my biggest heroes, because they supported me from, I mean, they're my mentors, they're my support system, and that was very important at that age. Giving a child the confidence that, look, you can make it, and giving you an equal opportunity like other kids. I think that's all that's needed, for kids with disabilities, so that they can grow up, believing in themselves, and go after their dreams.
Yeah, your parents sound like pretty incredible people, which makes sense because you're pretty incredible. Um, and you'll have to forgive me. There's a bit of lightning where I am right now, so you might be hearing these sort of big crashes of thunder. um, and I mean, that kind of speaks to where I'd love to, take this conversation to next, which is when we look at the climate of assistive technology and these conversations around accessibility and affordability and equity, we can kind of see, especially in recent reports, that there's 80% of the world's population of people living with disability come from low to middle income countries. I believe is sort of some of the latest statistics. Um, and as someone who grew up in a rural part of Africa and then had to move to the city just to access more of the support, how does that sort of statistic feel as someone who's been through your journey and as someone that is pioneering assistive technology in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, so it feels, like that's a huge burden. I mean, if you think about Africa, for example, Africa is is the youngest continent in terms of, the average age of, your young person. I think it's at 17 or 18 years. So we're a very young continent. However, when you look at the burden of disability and lack of access, it's actually limiting the potential of the future leaders, the future change makers, because uh, unlike in the West, where some of the leading factors or driving factors for disabilities and aging population, here you have the same, you do have aging population, but most of the people affected by disabilities are young people whose futures need to be secured, literally. So for me, that feels like that's why we can't, be business as usual in matters disability, and we have to address matters disability in a very sustainable way. And I believe in this nexus of um, capital meeting philanthropy and the responsibility of government, everyone working in unison to play their role so that we can give access, to persons with disabilities across many things. Assistive technology, of course, is one of the major gaps because only 1 in 10 have access. And for me, I coming from a background of technology and entrepreneurship, I have had the privilege of leading accelerators and incubators that produce success and great companies in other sectors like energy, education. So when I moved into this world, what I wanted to see is, where is the opportunity in all this? Where is the long-term sustainability? And we figure that, you need market-driven approaches in as much as you need rights-based approaches to address the needs of persons with disabilities. And I think when, at the nexus of technology and entrepreneurship, you can start doing amazing things in addressing the gaps we have in assistive tech. And that's exactly what we've done. We started out as an experiment, if I may call it that. So, Global Disability Innovation Hub got the opportunity to lead a global project called 80-20-30, that was supported by UK Aid, and to literally address the issue of assistive technology at a global scale. And when they came to Kenya, and they figured that, okay, Kenya is a country that has been on the leading front for innovation in many other areas. Look at mobile money. We literally now bank on our mobile phones, and coming from an era where 80 to 90% of the population was, did not have access to finance or banking services. So Kenya is a special place when it comes to innovation and technology in Africa. And then we figured, why not start looking at the disability sector from this lens of innovation and entrepreneurship? What could be possible here? Might we be able to create new industries for assistive technology in Africa to break the barriers that hinder access? We're talking about availability, we're talking about high cost, we're talking about quality. And for me, this was very exciting to leave my career in university where I was leading an incubator to try this. And 3.5 years later, not only have we tried this, we've actually been able to validate that we actually need to do more to secure the assistive technology products and services in Africa by supporting small businesses or startups that could literally scale their services across the continent. And we are beginning to see that now. So for me, it's very exciting to be contributing in a very meaningful way in an area that is so untapped, and to unlock new possibilities. Yeah, for the people in Africa and for the world.
And it sounds, you talk about these success stories and what you've already been able to achieve. And Innovate Now has finished its sixth cohort, I believe. And, you were only sort of founded in 2019, I believe. Can you talk about some of the assistive technology that you've been able to support and how you've discovered this technology that is emerging out of Africa?
Yeah, sure. So we are actually in the middle of our sixth cohort. So hopefully we'll have a demo day in December for them. But yeah, so I think I'm really impressed by the type of innovation that we have seen, or the, let me call it, the richness or the diversity in innovation. So, when you come to markets like Africa, where or countries like Kenya, where we are both struggling with, issues that could be addressed by, solving simple problems. And at the same time, you have opportunities for changing the rules of the game in some situations. So we are seeing like a whole spectrum of innovation, all the way from frugal innovation, low resource setting innovation, to very high tech innovation. And for me, this is beautiful because it's a nexus, and it speaks of the idea of a startup ecosystem. So some of the examples I would love to give you is, I'll start with the frugal innovation. So imagine this. One of the biggest challenges we have in most emerging markets and in most developing countries is this idea of accessible mobility or transportation, public transport. So most of our countries in Africa did not build accessible cities, and in that case, it means that most of our transport is not accessible. So it's very difficult for wheelchair users to move around even in short distances. Um, so back in 2019, when we took in our first cohort, I remember we took in an entrepreneur. His name is Lincoln. And Lincoln, I discovered Lincoln in the most exciting way through a YouTube video. And it was a video that was shot by the BBC. And I saw this young man give his story about uh, coming to Nairobi to look for job opportunities. And he was a self-taught engineer, and he learned a lot of his engineering on YouTube actually. And when he came to Nairobi, he had an experience. It was rush hour, and he saw a man using a manual tricycle, a manual wheelchair, trying to get onto a matatu. A matatu is public transport bus here in Nairobi. And of course, nobody would pay attention to him because during rush hour, everyone is trying to get in. Yeah, so the story of Lincoln. So Lincoln comes to Nairobi, and he had this experience where he sees disabled people not being able to access transport. It's raining, this person is being rained on. And he said to himself, I've been building drones and other electric vehicles. Why not build an accessible tricycle that had long power range that could take someone from, for short distances where they don't need to board a vehicle. So he actually went and built uh, what he now calls the Lincel tricycle. So it's a fully motorized tricycle built initially out of 80 to 90% recycled materials. And the most amazing thing is how he went about to build the battery, which is the most important thing in a motorized vehicle. And he went around and started collecting old laptop batteries, from junkyards, from offices, and he would go and take them apart and rebuild them, calibrate them, and build an entirely new battery that powers an electric tricycle. And he would go and get, an office chair. He'd go and get. He literally built his first tricycle like this, and when he did a demo of it, I mean, it was truly amazing because you see, entrepreneurs most of the time they face a double challenge. You don't have the capital to start what you want, and at the same time, for you to show potential and be investable, you need to show what you've built and what you have solved. And this is a type of innovation that is very in Africa is very common, where we work with what we have and we solve problems. And today, Lean cell technology is one of the leading motorized uh, tricycle, accessible tricycle producer, and they have literally almost sold hundreds of these tricycles. And the most amazing thing is they cut down the costs by almost 50%, and they want to do it even more if they're able to manufacture at scale. So, and this is so when we found him, this was for us very impressive, and we took him in, and we are seeing this type of innovations having immediate impact. You see, assistive technology is one of those things where you don't really have to wait for 10 years to see the impact. The impact is immediate because now you have, a lady, one of his first customers is a lady that sells vegetables in the streets, and she's able to move in very difficult terrains. And one of her stories is now beyond going to business. She's able to go to church and interact more in her community. um,
Wow, that's incredible. And on that note of sort of immediate impact, the conversations around Remarkable's agenda is to get assistive technology in the hands of the people that need it most as quickly as possible. And the startup space likes to move quickly, but I understand that there's regulations sometimes get in the way, and having to get things sort of approved when it comes to assistive technology and that sort of process of regulation and that process of getting these designs in the hands of people that need them. How quick is that?
yeah, so and here's something which I think I mean, it could be both a blessing and a curse. It depends on how you look at it. So in our markets, in Kenya and in most African markets, we are quite early in the development of our regulation and standards for a lot of uh, assistive products, and specifically the assistive technology and medical devices sector is not as developed. So what you see then is that the first thing an entrepreneur or an innovator would think is not what's the regulation for this. They will go ahead and build it and test it, and then kind of try to figure out, okay, now I'm at a point where I need to scale up, or really go to market in a big way, and I need to comply to standards. What we've been able to do in the accelerator to kind of also make sure that this is not doesn't work against the entrepreneur, because what you realize is that with assistive technology, you're thinking about the safety of the user. You're thinking about the principle here is the basic principle in medicine: do no harm. I think we extend that even in assistive technology. So at Innovate now, one of the things that really makes our accelerator different is that we are very focused on human-centered design, and we have what we call live labs, which is designing and innovating with the end user from the beginning. So our entrepreneurs spend at least 6 weeks validating what they are building for safety, for user friendliness, uh, directly with the users, and this is to fill that gap, because we know that where standards do not exist, or when they are not followed, there might be that risk, and that's what we're trying to prevent. At the same time, we are working closely with regulators to make them aware that, look, there is new innovation that's coming, but there might not necessarily exist regulation or standards for it. So how can we work together to develop new standards? And one of the examples I'd love to give is we launched earlier mid this year. We actually launched Kenya's first. I mean, it's actually Africa's first digital accessibility standard. So before, we didn't have a standard for building accessible products, but now we do, and this has been developed very collaboratively with all players. in the ecosystem, and I was part of that process, and that's what we are seeing. So on one hand, innovation is actually pushing regulators to think we need regulation for XYZ. But at the same time, innovators are not, they're not stopping at, okay, we need to find out what the regulation is fast. And I think that's what we are dealing with in this part of the world. And of course, sometimes it's difficult to navigate the AT ecosystem because it's a bit fragmented. There are many players, but the entrepreneurial mindset is one of you know just do it, go to the market, talk to the end users, figure it out. And that's what we're trying to bring in this space, which is not common. I mean, the medics would do it quite differently. They wouldn't take that approach.
And when it comes to the conversation of the growing assistive tech sector in Africa, what is what is the barrier? Why is it that capital is something that you need to sort of advocate for and get people to see a real purpose in giving money to these startups?
Absolutely. So look, so when you think about building startups, and here I'm speaking specifically about technology-driven businesses that have a massive potential to scale. Usually, you do require early stage capital. Otherwise, these entrepreneurs will not get on a path where they will attract the resources they need to scale at each stage. And this is the biggest missing piece in the startup ecosystem for disabled entrepreneurs and for assistive tech entrepreneurs. We don't have, assistive technology has not proven itself, as a high return sector yet. I think we're trying to take it there, but many investors, who are commercial investors, or who are looking at it from especially the metrics of just the return on investment, they need to see that there's potential. They need to see that building an assistive tech businesses can be equally rewarding as being a fintech, for example. And this is very difficult to do when you don't have cash for R&D, and some of these innovations, they do require significant amount of capital, especially when you have things like hardware involved, or new disruptive technologies involved. And so what we strongly believe in is that we need to work with impact investors who can see the potential of these businesses at a very early stage, and give them access to early stage capital that then goes ahead to make them ready and investable for your traditional investors down the line. And I think that's why some of the amazing initiatives we're seeing coming up, like the disability accelerators, moonshot by Enable Ventures and Smart Job, really make a significant step towards saying, how do we address this gap? How do we link disability innovators to capital, and set them up on a path to become investable and sustainable? And I think this should be the mindset of every accelerator or program that's supporting entrepreneurs in this space. We shouldn't make them feel like they are not the regular type of businesses, or they do not need to follow the same path to raise capital. We all know that there's been proven ways of helping companies that are changing the world today succeed, and we need to bring that mindset. We need to bring that talent. We need to bring that capital to the disability sector, and that's why I think remarkable, innovate now, all these other hubs across the world. This is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And do you think that the conversation that startups have to have coming out of, Australia from the assistive tech market, or the US, versus startups coming out of Africa, is there a different conversation that needs to be had? Are there, you know, do you find that you have to sort of advocate more or less depending on where you are in the world.
The simple truth is that when you look at how capital has been allocated historically, I mean, you can see that it's not equally distributed or allocated. There are areas like Africa and Kenya where we are now just emerging and positioning ourselves as a global player for venture capital and other forms of capital. So, and the plain truth also is that only until recently have we started seeing capital also going to minority groups, venture capital going to minority groups. I think we've had a major shift looking at, look, wait a minute, where is the inclusion? Where is the diversity in the way we allocate capital? Is it only for a select group of people? How about women? How about people of color? And for me here, I want to ask, how about disabled leaders? Where are our disabled venture capitalists? Where are they? How do we drive capital to them? Because only they have the real opportunity to drive capital where it's needed most. They are the need knowers. They know how best to make it work, how best to bring in those returns. And I think that's the language we have to advocate: total inclusion and diversity in the allocation of venture capital across the world. And I think that is going to be a game changer.
And you've gone from working with incubators to also being an advocate in your own right. How has that journey been for you? Have you had to sort of come up against a lot of stigma and stereotypes and people assuming, just making assumptions, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be expected. And but I think the most powerful way of uh, eliminating stigma, or actually ending stigma, is actually to take action that puts stigma at bay. Just prove people wrong and do what needs to be done. And I think that's what we are trying to do here. We're not focusing on the non-believers or those who believe the assistive technology sector is not viable. I've heard so many times, this type of language, you guys still need to, prove yourselves, you're a couple of years out, and these are the things that takes the entrepreneurial mindset, because entrepreneurship is not just about the science of building successful companies. I think it takes a certain attitude and a certain faith that things are possible, and to go against any other thing that's telling you that it's not possible, and until you make it happen. So it is my desire, it is my dream that we will be able to raise capital for disabled entrepreneurs. We will be able to raise capital for the assistive tech accelerators that we're running, and this will be the big single best advocate for our work. We won't have to say a word because we'll have done it.
Brilliant. And with the startups that you're supporting with Innovate Now, are you seeing these startups largely driven by people with disability, or is it, allies and people that work in the space?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I think most of the startups that have made significant steps forward or progress in our accelerators have actually been led by disabled entrepreneurs or teams that are very diverse in terms of their employees. They have, disabled entrepreneurs, or even at the leadership and strategic level, at the board level, they have disabled advisors. And I think we can't downplay the significance of this, because it goes back to the principle about inclusion, and you cannot include without involving persons with disabilities. I think they say nothing about us without us. That's kind of how they say it, in the advocacy world. So but for me, it's not to say that if you don't have a disability, you cannot solve for disability. Not at all. I think it's how driven, how deep is your understanding of the root cause of the problems, and what's your driving force. And I think having people with disabilities at the center of this is one of the most powerful driving forces. And here's also one thing I've come to learn: it's about what you call the allies, or the peripheral of disability. When you look at the global disability opportunity, or the lost opportunity today, it's nearly $2 trillion, and this is by those with disabilities and their families or and their allies. And I think we have to look at this as an opportunity that needs to be unlocked, and a way to elevate disability not just as a good inclusion or diversity theme, but as a real area of opportunity, as a real life changing opportunity, and a driver for prosperity, even in business. And I think companies that have realized this are making significant efforts and investments in driving inclusion of persons with disabilities in business. And I think, businesses is one of the biggest forces for good that can make a significant difference. And I think we need more of them to kind of say, okay, how do we support uh, other market driven solutions that are coming out of accelerators? I think we need more corporate involvement in supporting disability innovation, because we are working towards the same goal, and we know we can unlock more talent for the corporate world through assistive technology. We can unlock more hours of productivity or whatever it is by making this a serious focus.
And you've mentioned, I believe that sort of the roadmap for Innovate Now is to really look global, and expand the reach of the startups coming out of your area of the world. What does that mean when you think global? How are you aiming to connect your startups with the rest of the world?
That's amazing. So one of the things I honestly believe is that the reason disability is a global issue, because it's an opportunity for humanity to actually be more inclusive. And I think if you look at it as an area of business, it's one of the most, I guess, uh, untapped or hidden opportunities that we have. So when I talk to our ventures today that are solving, for relevant problems here in Nairobi, I tell them that never think of yourself just as a small Kenyan company. There are so many people with disabilities all over the world that could be, needing your product, and you have to look at it as a market, and you have to think about scalability. And I think we've started to see some of this. One of the companies that I'm really proud of is called Hope Tech. And Hope Tech is one of the companies that is on the uh, disruptive innovation spectrum of assistive technology. They are reimagining the way blind people can see in today's world, and they're trying to use computer vision. They're trying to use haptics and gaming technology to bring some of the most advanced wearable tech. And when they started solving this, because this is a Kenyan entrepreneur, they were not just thinking about, I'm just going to do this for a small group of people here in Kenya. They were thinking that, you see, there are visually impaired people all over the world, and technology is making things possible. Look at the uh, motor vehicle industry and the aviation industry, and how they're using these technologies to have self-driving cars and stuff like that. So why is it that we haven't made this same investment in people? Because people need vision more than cars do. And if it's possible to make that through technology, why not? And why not just do it for the world and not just for Kenya? And this company, as we speak, is launching in both the UK and in Austria, and this is a Kenyan company. And this is what speaks about the disability opportunity. It's a global one. It's not just for a small country.
Congratulations. That is such a huge win. And we've probably got time for a few more questions, but I would love to sort of double back to this. At the very beginning, you mentioned that when growing up, disability was I suppose not something that was typically accepted in the community that you grew up in. And if we sort of jump to the work that you're doing now with Innovate Now, and we learn of the disabled entrepreneurs coming out in the space and being bold and driving their startups, are we seeing that conversation shift and the dial towards a more inclusive conversation and acceptance of disability sort of happening in your part of the world?
No, absolutely, because one of the most powerful way to shatter any um, stigma or like lack of awareness is actually to create that awareness. When people see things different, when they see a different narrative, when the story on TV is not about a poor person that needed help, but one of a disabled person who just won an election in his area. Because this actually happened in Kenya. We just had an election, and we started seeing some of disabled leaders being elected in elective positions. And at that point, nobody is thinking about, oh, look at this person and their limitation. They are looking at, wow, look at how we are having diverse leadership, and how persons with disabilities can contribute in a very meaningful way. And this is what is happening also in the startup world. When you have businesses that are reimagining how people move, how people see, then they are beginning to challenge their biases. They are beginning to challenge the stigmas in a very powerful way. And now many kids will not be hidden, or parents will be more confident. Maybe my child also has a real chance here. Let me give them that opportunity. Let me expose them, and give them the support that they need. And this is, for me, I believe that we need a long-term positive advocacy in the disability space, where we speak a different language. We speak a language of technology, empowering and unlocking potential. We speak about, you know, leaders and persons with disabilities contributing meaningfully to society, or even just showing real life opportunities, or real life of persons with disabilities leading an ordinary life and being independent. And that's why things like sports is also very powerful. When you look at Paralympics, the Global Disability Innovation Hub was a legacy project of the London 2012 Paralympic Games. And this is where there was a total mind shift. And I think when you carry that and you implant it in the positive advocacy that we're doing, you're definitely going to have a change in mindset, and it's going to be so powerful, because nobody can argue with uh, facts or even numbers when it comes to if an assistive technology startup succeeds. It won't be a matter of, oh, is disability viable? No.
Yeah, and it's so brilliant to see this. Um, it's sort of felt like silos in that around the world. There's been these people driving this change when it comes to assistive technology, with Remarkable, with Innovate Now, and with the initiatives that Gina has just helped launch with Moonshot and the Inclusive Innovation Network. Seeing all of these communities come together and seeing that sort of collaboration just unify and ignite this real movement is so exciting, because there's no real competitors. It's the same goal, which is just a more inclusive and accessible world. Um, so thank you for the work you're doing by being part of all these amazing communities. I would love to ask you to end the conversation by providing our guests with a remarkable insight. So, something that you'd like to share about your hopes for the future, or some advice that they can take away from this conversation. about assistive technology or the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Viv. Yeah, absolutely. So, look, so I think we are at a very interesting time in history, where the power of technology, the power of connectedness, the power of the internet is really connecting all the right people across the world. And it's no longer lonely to be working in this sector. And we are beginning to see possibilities, and to believe that we can drive this change in a more sustainable way. So my dreams for the future, or my hope for the future, is that when we invest in disability inclusion, when we invest in startups, in disabled leaders, in disabled entrepreneurs, we are not just investing for today, we are investing for the future. We are going to create a more sustainable world. We're going to create a more inclusive world. And I think we are taking the right steps, but we have to make those decisions today so that the future can be better. So invest in disabled leaders, invest in disabled entrepreneurs, and we will create the world that we want to see in future.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bernard. It's been such a pleasure to have you here for this remarkable insights conversation.
Thank you, Vivian. It's a pleasure.